Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome back to my cozy lair. And today we are going to talk about a full moon that is giving me so much inspiration. This is the kind of conversation I live for. It just lights me up. So we are going to get into this Gemini full moon that is happening on December 7th into the 8th. And the key thing with this full moon is you're going to be noticing a lot of messaging around this full moon that categorizes it as kind of aggressive, agitated, frustrating, kind of bubbly, troubly. That's the character that it's been given. And most full moons are going to have those kind of key words to them, right? Whenever we have a full moon, some of them are really psychic and dreamy. Some of them are hopeful and optimistic. Some of them are about healing or catharsis. And this full moon happens to be one of those full moons that's associated with frustration and agitation. And a lot of us, when we see that, right, we see there's a prognosis for a full moon that says this is going to be essentially a negative full moon where for those of us who are sensitive, we should just curl up in blankets, hide in our houses, and wait for those couple of days to blow over and the energy to settle down, and then we can maybe go about our lives, right? And I just find this so unhelpful. One, because we're not really looking at the deeper layers there. What does it mean to be frustrated and agitated? About what? In what context? How do we relate to the ideas of frustration, anger, agitation? Do we allow ourselves to connect with those emotions? What's really happening when we sit with a full moon that's allowing us the space to explore those emotions? For me, these are the really interesting questions. And they're ones we often don't get the chance to dive more deeply into because we get told this is going to be agitating and everybody's going to have a horrible time communicating, so let's just hide. So this is why this kind of full moon just gives me life, because these kind of reframes are what I live for. And so let's get into why it's getting this reputation and how to work with it. So we've got our friend the sun over at 16 degrees of Sagittarius. This full moon's happening right in the heart of Sagittarius season, a season full of optimism, expansion, and philosophical reframes. This full moon is happening at 16 degrees of Gemini. And the key characteristic of this full moon, what is giving it its little reputation, its little song and dance, is that this full moon is completely conjunct, perfectly conjunct Mars retrograde in Gemini. So let's talk about this. Mars retrograde in and of itself gets a bad rap. It's often associated with passive aggression, frustration, just kind of setbacks in life. And I did do a conversation about Mars retrograde that I will link here somewhere so that you can check that out if you haven't seen it. But essentially, Mars retrograde is much more about how we value our movement through the world. And it's often a place where we are reassessing what we're doing in the world, why it matters, and how we use our fire energy to move forward in life. This particular Mars retrograde has a lot to do with the storytelling we have around our value, around our productivity, around the way we use our energy, and also storytelling around how we protect ourselves and armor ourselves up. So it's also a really important aspect and transit that's asking us to do some deep inner reflection. But Mars retrograde is also often a time of deep empowerment, a time of really deep truth-telling for ourselves. And I think that's the more important aspect of both this full moon and the Mars retrograde transit as a whole. And this full moon is going to be kind of a high point of this Mars retrograde transit. It's going to allow us to see clearly what is longing for transmutation and expression. And a lot of times when we think about that, we think about the grieving process, right? We think about feeling some sadness, a release there. We might think about the creative brainstorming process, because after all, this is a full moon in Gemini, and Gemini is a storyteller. This is the energy of storytelling and fairy tales and the juiciness of sitting around a fire and having a story woven and told. It's really, really beautiful communicative energy. But often we will kind of skirt around the uncomfortable emotion of maybe anger and frustration, right? And I know I do this, and I am sure I am not alone. Maybe I have some friends actually who are very good at moving through their anger and letting that be a part of their process, actually. I do know people like that. But a lot of us, we kind of put that one over there, because it's not the most acceptable of emotions, right? It's not the pretty one. It's not the soulful one. It's not the one that we feel is going to reward us. And we have very little representation of healthy expression of frustration and anger in our culture, in our movies, in the things that surround us. We don't have examples of how to process and allow that heat to move through our bodies and through our minds so that we feel free and we feel liberated and we also feel integrated. And so I think that's a part of the reason why a full moon like this often brings up kind of these conversations that make it sound so stressful. And Mars is often associated with more of those stressful kind of moon things. So like having a moon and Mars conjunction is associated with a deep discomfort. And I think that's more of a reflection of our culture, the discomfort of having emotions that aren't part of the prettier, more philosophical set of movement through the world. And so let's get down to the core process that this moon is bringing for us. This moon wants us to pay attention and give a little bit of space to the parts of ourselves that are feeling steamrolled, frustrated, ignored, maybe even having petty grievances. It's a part of ourselves that is often a very creative part of ourselves. It's often associated with kind of this idea of our inner child, the sensitive one. But this sensitive one doesn't always get heard, doesn't always get the support it needs. And so a lot of times those kind of frustrations, those irritations will build up in the background for a long time. And because they seem petty, maybe some of those irritations or frustrations feel petty, they feel beneath us, they feel unimportant, they feel like they aren't allowed, they're not legitimate enough, we often will not give them space to just move through, which is all that this full moon is asking for. It's asking us to just make a little bit of space to allow that agitated, annoyed energy, that frustrated energy to move through our bodies. And that's not to say, we have to go out and get into fist fights and let it out that way. Because once again, anger and frustration we don't have a lot of examples of that expression in healthy ways. We don't have it. And so this is a process that I think journaling, scribbling on a page if you want, painting, moving your body, putting on a song, that just any way that feels really good to you to let that voice move through you. Let the heat move through you, let the frustration move through you. These are voices that are feeling vulnerable and scared because this is the part of you that wants to express something, try something new, break out of an old generational pattern, break out of judgments around being creative or curious or fun. This is a part of us that often will build up some of these resentments and agitations because we're trying to protect ourselves from all of those judgments, from old generational hand-me-downs, and from our culture and from the judgments that build up in our lives. And so allowing these voices, these frustrations, these agitations to move through actually allows us to access our most vulnerable self, and also the self that is willing and ready to try new things out and to make changes in life. But if we are constantly repressing the part of ourselves that's saying, I'm feeling steamrolled by this thing, or I'm feeling really frustrated by my community right now because they picked somebody else to lead the way and I'm sitting here alone. A lot of times we will say this voice isn't legitimate because it's too petty, it's too selfish. It's not a voice that we want to necessarily bring to the next community meeting or, lead our entire lives with. But it's important that it gets moved through our bodies and that we allow it to be heard and fully seen. And I think so often, when we think of an agitated moon, we think, well, I'm just going to feel agitated. But what's really happening is this is about allowing those kind of itchy emotions the space to move through. And then what happens is there is energy there. There is energy that's available to move forward in life. And I think the most important takeaway of this full moon is once you've given yourself a little bit of time to feel those hot or itchy emotions, to let that petty voice get written out on the page, to let that part of ourselves that's feeling frustrated or annoyed move through, there is clarity about what we actually want to take action on. There's clarity about what we really want to pursue or shift. And this is where it really is so liberating and freeing and gives us a sense of spaciousness and curiosity. And for me, having this really powerful Mars retrograde transit in Gemini, and now this full moon high point in Gemini energy is all about curiosity and play. It's all about the willingness to try things out and see what happens. And when we're able to be curious about our anger, our frustration, our agitation, our itchiness, the heat that's building up in us, this is often a doorway through which we realize what we really want to be taking with us into the new year, into the next stage of our lives, into the next path, and to get really, really honest about those things within ourselves. So that's the goal of this conversation, and that's a much more helpful, I think, way of thinking about this Gemini full moon, and a way that I think is very empowering and also just fun even. I think this could even be a really, really fun, creative breakthrough time during these couple of days while we work with this full moon. Because, as we move through all the emotions, we let everything move through, wow, some new ideas can flow in. So I'm shuffling my cards here. See what wants to come out for our intuitive message. And for those of you who are interested, I'm going to be doing an activation over on Patreon. I do this for every single new and full moon, where we're just going to be feeling through this. I'll be walking you through a way to let some of those hot emotions move through your body. I would love to see you over there if you are interested in hanging out and exploring. Queen of Wands, very fiery, which we are in Sag season after all. Queen of Wands. All right. This is a character. This is a figure that is associated with owning our space, owning our space in the world. Queen of Wands is the energy of somebody who's just going to go for it, just going to ask the question, is just going to submit the document, submit the art to the contest, whatever it is, and just not even question it. It's a very confident energy. I think that's important in the context of this Gemini full moon, because when we let those hot, itchy emotions move through, it actually creates a lot more confidence in the way we move through the world, because we're integrated. We're no longer putting part of ourselves into that shadow and not processing it. And that allows us to have this clarity about what we want to move on. It's a reminder too that, Queen of Wands really owns her destiny and has a deep trust in it. And I think it's been a pretty intense year. Let's be real. There have been a lot of waves moving through the world this year. A lot of the sensitive ones among us have kind of had to retract back a little bit and, kind of watch and pay attention and listen. There's been some big discomfort. And with that has been a little bit of retracting in. So Queen of Wands for me is a reminder to allow your spirit and your space to re-expand a little bit, to show up fully to the table a little bit more. And that looks different for every single person. I think this is not a cookie cutter energetic expression, the Queen of Wands. So often I think this gets associated with getting up on stage and yelling at people or being a rock star or getting all the attention on you. But the Queen of Wands for me is really about owning your energetic signature and really stepping fully into that and feeling that strength of connection to your path, finding that kind of knowing that is leading you forward and allowing you to be in that creative expression. And, Queen of Wands is associated with fire. And one of the things with fire energy, and I know this is an air full moon, but we are in Sag season and it's connected to Mars, which is very fiery. Fire energy is very comfortable with allowing energy to move through in bursts. And part of the beauty of connecting with fiery energy and working with it is that gives us access to new creative pathways, new creative ways of owning our space. And I think this is really a full moon that's going to be all about that. So I'm really excited about it. Sometimes a little agitation in the water can really bring up some new, beautiful things that have been stuck stagnant and sitting inside of our bodies for a really, really long time. And this is the chance to move that through and feel and be alive and not feel numbed out in certain parts of ourselves. So I'm so excited to see how this moves through. Like I mentioned just a moment ago, I would love to see you over on Patreon. That is where we just have so much fun diving deep on all of these topics every single week. Do all the activations. In my upper tier, we do Zoom calls a couple of times a month and we hang out and we talk about life. It's amazing. I'd love to see you there. You can find me on my Instagram, of course, and my website. And I would love it if you stuck around here. We are going to be having so many beautiful conversations coming up about all sorts of transits and explorations. 2023 is a big year full of shift. And I'm very excited to get to be the voice of reframe around so many of the transits we have coming up in 2023. So I'd love to see you here for those conversations because we've got Saturn moving out of Aquarius. We have Pluto moving out of Capricorn. We have so much to look forward to in 2023. I hope to see you here so soon. Have a beautiful Gemini full moon, and I will catch you in our next conversation.